So now we're recording, so we can share this with people who can't make it at 11 in the morning. And we'll let more people in. So I have no idea with 11 o'clock if it's a good time for people or not, but at least we have the option that we can post it and people can watch it later. And hopefully the people who watch it will see value and say, I want to share this with my grandkids, with my friend, with my, whoever it is. So no pressure, but it has to be really good. All right, let's see. It's 11:01, 11:03, we're going to start.
Okay, good. It's a very powerful role you have, Ron.
I know.
Yeah.
I think I can even mute somebody, which I can't do in real life.
Oh, to have that power.
That'd be great.
Exactly. What does a Zoom relationship look like? Well, it's got certain perks.
The list is forming in my mind.
That's the book.
Who would I mute if you could mute? Who would you mute?
Exactly.
The perks of Zoom relationships.
I thought that was great last night in the nonviolent communication workshop. Learning and teaching about being empowered in what you have to say, but also making real space. And what struck me as interesting, aside from all of it, was where she was saying, Kathy Smith, the facilitator, was saying, our temptation is to say, oh, my uncle, da, 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 or I, to share our anecdote in response to what we hear people say. And she's saying, but that's not what they're asking for, unless they're asking for that. They're asking just to be heard about so many issues. So, all right, I said 11:03, it's 11:03, let's begin. And as I said, I'll welcome people as they come in. So a little Zoom courtesy. Everybody, if you would, please be muted. You'll notice you probably are automatically muted, so just keep it in that position if you don't mind. If you want to ask questions, it's easy. What we'll do is go to the bottom of your screen on whatever device you're using. You'll see the chat bar. You can click on chat and type in your questions. You can type in a question as the program goes along the next hour for a particular speaker or for the group. So just feel like if you heard somebody say something and you want to get back to them on that, as you would in a conversation, you're welcome to, or you can just say, here's my general question. Okay, we're recording the session just so that we can share it. It's part of Outreach, right? More people can view this at later times and we can review it. Hopefully that's useful to us. I want to welcome everybody and thank our panelists for giving their time and their expertise. I want to introduce each of you. Put glasses on for that so I get it right. Dr. Lynne Steinman is a semi-retired clinical psychologist in Valencia. She received her PhD from USC's Joint Program in Clinical Psychology and Gerontology and went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical neuropsychology at UCLA. She sits on the board of directors for the Los Angeles County Psychological Association, where she served as president in 2018. Dr. Steinman has been in practice as a psychotherapist for over 40 years, and she especially enjoys working with anxiety. Thank you.
Thank you.
What made everybody laugh?
The 40 gets to me. It's like, oh my God.
By the way, you should have told me I can skip those numbers. All right, Dr. Michelle Witkin is a licensed psychologist with over 25 years of experience. She has a private practice in Valencia, California. Dr. Witkin specializes in treating children, teens, and adults with obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety disorders. She has been a featured speaker on podcasts and radio shows, is a regular presenter at national conferences, and writes on topics related to anxiety and OCD. Dr. Witkin is a graduate of the International OCD Foundation's Behavior Therapy Training Institute, BTTI, and Pediatric BTTI, and is a clinical fellow of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Dr. Witkin is also trained in supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions, otherwise known as SPACE, S-P-A-C-E. Jason Mechanick, PsyD, is a licensed clinical psychologist and has been providing therapy to adults, adolescents, and their families for over 20 years. Dr. Mechanick has been trained in evidence-based theories that focus on trauma and substance abuse, as well as disaster preparedness. In addition to his therapy work, Dr. Mechanick has provided diversity and grief therapy trainings, as well as supervision to psychology interns. He has designed and implemented an environmental awareness program and a freshman orientation psychoeducational group to support the transition for students into high school. At the Fulton Psychological Group, Dr. Mechanick conducts group, individual, couples, and family therapy, and his experience with depression, adjustment disorder, ADHD, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, and oppositional defiant disorder. Lastly, Dr. Laurie Eisenberg is a clinical psychologist. She specializes in working with children, teens, and families. She received her PhD from UCLA and over the last 30 years has enjoyed working in private practice as well as in hospital and school settings. Dr. Eisenberg has also served as a consultant for several community agencies, supervising the provision of early intervention services to children with autism and their families. She enjoys teaching undergraduate courses in child psychopathology and treatment, as well as supervising graduate students as they begin their clinical training. So those are the introductions. It's an honor to have all of you here and in conversation with us in our community. I think it's important, I think all of us, when we talk about the title, right? Living with uncertainty, we all feel like maybe we have an expertise in it now, but probably all of us have a sliver of expertise. We feel like we've done it, but we don't necessarily know how we did it, how we're doing it, how to get through the next part of it. So I think it might be helpful to first define it. And I'll use a definition, and I think everybody can probably add their own, personal data to the definition. So let's say one useful definition of uncertainty is incomplete information or knowledge about whether, where, when, how, or why an event or experience has occurred or will occur. Is that useful to everybody? Let me repeat it. Incomplete information or knowledge about whether, where, when, how, or why an event or experience has occurred or will occur. So let me suggest that we all, myself included, just absorb that for a moment. Think about what that's meant in our lives and what it's meant in the last few months, the last nearly 2 years. And I want to ask all of you, the panelists, how do we do this? How do people deal with anxiety? Well, not anxiety. How do people deal? We'll get to that. But how do people deal with uncertainty typically? What are your experiences? What do you see in the populations that you serve? Laurie?
Well, I think the first point I want to make is that uncertainty in general oftentimes signifies danger to the brain, that's where we go. We do not like it. And when we experience uncertainty, we are primed to fill in the missing pieces, right? So we oftentimes create stories, and some of those stories have distortions. We tend to catastrophize. We tend to over-personalize. And because what the research shows is we would much rather know about a painful event that's coming than uncertainty. So if I can mention, they did this study a while ago where they were looking at brain functioning, and they found that when people knew that they were getting a painful shock, they were much calmer than when the other group of people thought that they were going to get the shock some of the time. Okay, so knowing that something bad is happening is worse than uncertainty. And our brain kind of goes haywire and creates these stories. And then we react based on that.
Wait, so Laurie, you're saying that if we don't know for sure, it's worse than knowing for sure.
Right. So job uncertainty, is an example, is more stressful than losing a job. Okay. Because losing a job, you can then create a plan about what you're going to do and you know the facts. But uncertainty, am I going to lose it? Am I not going to lose it? That creates even more anxiety.
And we know that early humans, for this
this trait of disliking uncertainty really was helpful to early humans, because those early humans who better were able to try to control their environment lived longer, had more offspring, and this trait of wanting to manage and take care of and get rid of uncertainty became pretty much encoded in our DNA. And so that is part of the legacy that we're left now, that started out it being very helpful, and now at times certainly becomes very challenging, especially during this time when it's not just uncertainty, but it's kind of uncertainty on steroids.
Yeah.
Ron, can you read the first few words of your definition again of uncertainty?
Sure. Incomplete information
Perfect.
or
That's
knowledge.
incomplete information. One of the things that I find interesting about all this is, in this day and age, we have so many resources to go complete that information, and we search everywhere. We look on the internet, we look on Twitter, we go to journals, we go to books, we go to podcasts. There is so much information. Part of what I think is the issue is we don't know which part of the information is accurate, which part of the information to believe, which part of the information actually helps us connect the dots. So there's an added frustration, I think, amongst the uncertainty that, okay, now that there are all of these avenues, I don't know which one's accurate. I don't know which one's going to help me. And sometimes there's an information overload that doesn't help us fulfill the need or desire to understand what that outcome could be.
Right, right. And when you kind of think about putting this all together, right? So we're wired that when we get information like, oh no, like we need to take care of this situation. Our brain is a little bit of a problem solving machine, right? It doesn't know the difference of when I get anxious and unsure and there's actually a problem I have to take care of, versus I'm anxious and unsure and there's actually no solution. So like, going to Jason's point of there's so much information, we get this sense of, oh, I don't know. Okay, well, I can go to all these sources, where in the past it might have been, I don't know, and I've got no way of knowing, and that's what I have to kind of sit with. And so sort of being where we are today, we think, if I get that signal, I don't know, I need to know, we've got to go search it out, which that's what a lot of people tend to do. It doesn't serve them well.
We're naturally problem solving, right? Isn't that what we want? Solutions. A plus B has to equal, and we're not content until we know what it equals. And obviously it sounds to me from what you're saying that it's good. We have answers. The answers are out there, but it's also not good because the answers aren't clear. It's not like Walter Cronkite at one point in a day says, here's the answer. We have every kind of source, and we don't trust the sources. And then we have an idea of what truth is. And then somebody walks through the door whom we love, and suddenly they, call into question what we heard. And now we're back in this kind of land of uncertainty, not only about what will or won't happen, but what we believe. I think that's stressful for us right now.
Yeah.
All the information.
And sometimes the answers are confusing, and sometimes there actually is no answer. Like, for example, when will this end? There's no answer.
Oh, Ron? Oh.
Yeah, let me ask that we don't take questions yet, if you don't mind. Just mute yourself. Lynn, let me ask you, you wanted to say something?
Sure. On top of that, also in our brains, we have what we call a negativity bias, where we tend to glom onto that information and pick out that information and emphasize that information, which is negative. Again, something that was seen as probably helpful to early humans, not so helpful now.
Right. Which really, I think, really speaks to the fact that it's not the uncertainty itself that's the problem. It's our relationship to it and what we do with it, what perspective we take on it, which leads nicely into some of the things that we can do in uncertainty. But it's not the uncertainty. We live in uncertainty all the time. A million things a day are uncertain. It's what Lynn was saying about how we think about it.
Yeah, and I think if we don't get to the hows, people will be very upset with us. However,
Mhm.
Let's stay here for a second so that people can recognize themselves in this. I just want to ask you, Jason, since you have a male perspective and work with male clients, probably all of you do, but do you think, and maybe other people can answer this as well, do boys and men handle uncertainty in a way that's unique? And maybe women have, maybe the converse is the question as well.
Well, it's a broad generalization, but historically, men are problem solvers and we want to create a solution now. I don't know how many couples therapy sessions I've sat in where the wife wants to process things and the man just wants to solve the thing. And until you can find that negotiation point, there's conflict. So yeah, I do think that the sitting with uncertainty is much more uncomfortable for men, because we want there to be an answer and we want it to be there right now. And if I don't know what it is, I'm going to go find that answer because someone has to have it. Again, this is a very broad generalization, but I do think that that is often the case.
Anybody want to add a perspective on gender and uncertainty, or is it pretty universal?
I mean, I see, I want to say I think this is backed up by research, but I see that the men that I work with tend to experience more physical symptoms regarding uncertainty, right? They may be struggling more with like gastrointestinal issues when this kind of stuff is coming up. And but I can't think of the research to back it up right now. I don't know if any of you guys can.
No, I see that too. I see that too. And I think part of that again is just socialization over time, that it's still, even though it's improving, I think it's still less acceptable for men to sort of express, I'm scared and such, or other kinds of feelings. So some of it gets internalized and manifests itself differently.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think there is a sense and expectation that we will lead in a certain way, whether it's our family or anybody else that we're leading. And we don't want to walk behind a general who's uncertain into war, right? We want to have a resolute leader. And that isn't always comfortable to be resolute when we don't have the answers. And maybe sometimes we have to know that, maybe that's why soldiers also pray. They look to their strategies, their maps, their plans, but they also say, ultimately, it's not all in our hands. Lynne, what's your thought on age in relation to coping with uncertainty? Because maybe I would assume that as we get older, we stack up more and more experience with living with uncertainty, more decades of it, so we're better at it. Is that false or true?
I don't know the research on that, so I'm just kind of disclaiming here that I'm speaking anecdotally, and I can certainly see that that would be one way of looking at it. On the other hand, we can also look at, and certainly not in every situation, hopefully not in very many situations, but there are also novel contributions that can occur as we get older, like some lack of mobility, some increase in social isolation. To my mind, it's a lot harder to sit with uncertainty if I'm trying to do it by myself, as opposed to having somebody to do it with. And so I could actually argue that question both ways. I also, just personally, and as you can see by my bio, I'm what we call a seasoned psychologist, euphemistically. And that I'm in the process of retiring. I personally have experienced questions that I didn't think I would have, like, what is my retirement going to look like? Is it going to look like what I had envisioned in terms of activities? And so how long is this going to last? Is there going to be a time where I'm going to be able to go out and have those lunches with friends and do that volunteer work, et cetera, where when I was younger, that would never be a question that would arise for me, because I would automatically assume that it was going to be fine. So.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I can imagine that a lot of nodding heads as people hear your story, because how many people have told me that they had these plans of travel and they have these plans to do things that are limited or in question right now. Yeah, and also the question of, are we on a sprint or a marathon, right? We know how to gear for a sprint. So we all started this with a sense of put your shoes on and warm up a little and we'll get through this. Maybe there was even a sense of ability. I know how to do, I know how to sprint at whatever age. But at some point you're going, I'm still on the track. I don't know how to do this. So where does community fit into this? How does community support our ability to cope well with uncertainty?
Well, I think that there is certainly a strength in numbers, that when we think we're doing something on our own, I think that makes the uncertainty, it's a deeper, harsher feeling. But when we have someone there with us, someone to either hold our hand or look us in the face, look us in the eyes and say, I get where you're coming from, or I'm experiencing something similar. I don't know the answer either, but if I don't know the answer and we can hold each other as we're experiencing this, I think that it can really be beneficial. I'm speaking, of course, one-on-one, but that works even greater when there is a larger community and there is greater support, and you hear so many similar stories from people where you may not even realize you had anything in common with that person. But when we come together over a topic like this, it really doesn't matter what your background is. There are so many similar feelings of not knowing what's going on out there. And I think that it is way, it just is calming to know that there are other people there with you.
Yeah. You know,
oh, go ahead, Michelle.
I run a support group for adults who have OCD, and I also run a support group for parents of children who have OCD. And these are groups that, because of this constant anxiety that's plaguing them, there's tremendous amount of dealing with uncertainty. It's in their face all the time. And one of the things that I've discovered is that when these people come together in the support groups and they have community, there's other people who are experiencing the same thing, and it doesn't solve anything, but there's this sense of,
Yeah.
You get what I'm going through, right? Yeah, I mean, it really mirrors what you were saying, Jason, just the sense of I am not alone, there's other people, and that group experience is powerful. Just that we are not going through this alone, and other people are too. And boy, that just sort of shores us up a little. You were going to say something, Laurie.
Yeah, no, just following what you're saying, and Jason, I think it normalizes the experience and allows us to gain some sense of acceptance. And I think it's really important to distinguish between acceptance and resignation. When we accept, we're not saying, oh, this is how it's going to be forever. We're accepting that this is how the situation is now, and this is the support we have around it. And that acceptance piece, I think, it's a core part of mindfulness, right? And it's a core part of keeping our bodies calm and our minds calm.
I think that's the acceptance piece is huge. And when I talk to people about acceptance versus resignation, which I do fairly frequently, I talk about acceptance, that resignation is kind of more of a trap where we feel like a victim, whereas acceptance is more of a choice that we're making for just this moment.
And it can be empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there any community that you think does this really well? Let's say a 12-step community, or I don't know, is there some model in our world that you think they've got a really good methodology for dealing with this? Like you said, you're talking about acceptance versus resignation. One is positive, let's say one is maybe negative, unless resignation is a choice to resign from a certain experience. I always had difficulty in my early years in dealing with 12-step, encountering the 12-step ideology and community, with dealing with the idea of surrender, because that was just kind of antithetical to everything I believed. I thought we're meant to bring ourselves to everything we're dealing with. And here was this idea of letting go that I now find really powerful. What are your thoughts on this?
I think the mindfulness community, if you could label that as a community, I think does, and that can be in a faith-based community, it can be in schools, it could be just, mindfulness organizations. I think they do a really good job of bringing us into the present, allowing us to sort of just experience all aspects of presence, physical aspects of presence, and to do things that calm our minds and sort of have the sense that this will pass, this feeling will pass. And there are things that we can do to help ourselves do that. So yeah, I don't know if that's community or a methodology, but I think
Well,
that works.
it's a great thought that there are enough people and a growing number of people in our community and in our society who are using those methods, right? That's
Right.
good for all of us.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to reflect on that?
And not to tout our sponsor here, but in a couple of days we're all going to get together and admit to an awful lot of sins that we've committed. And I think sometimes being there on Yom Kippur in a synagogue surrounded by people that we know, people that we care about, being able to say, I did this, I did this, I did this, is so much easier. And I think that the different communities out there, and obviously I'm extremely biased, but there are this moment on Yom Kippur, or moments throughout Yom Kippur, where we really get a chance to come together as a great group and say, yeah, we are far from perfect, and we admit to that. And I think that it makes it a lot easier to do that. And you can talk about LGBTQ, you can talk about the 12-step programs. Obviously, mindfulness is a good place, but I don't know. I think that Thursdays, or Wednesday night and Thursdays, this is a good time to see where that can come out and how the Jewish community can be supportive.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for speaking to our sponsors. Or our sponsor, depending on how you look at it. Let me ask you a question. Somebody reminded me the other day of I think it was Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation. And that really, captivated us to think that there was this great generation of people who have passed or in their older years now. What makes a generation great? Some people might assume it was what they had to endure. Well, isn't that good in this case? Isn't that telling us that we might have a greatest generation part two? We might have an extraordinary generation of kids and grandkids coming out of this. Is that likely, or am I being overly optimistic? Are they going to be stronger, more resilient, more able to cope than our generations have been?
I'd like
I think
to
it's
think so.
Yeah, I think it's a great notion.
I think it all depends on how you come through it, right? Like I think about the Holocaust sometimes because I've seen people who were broken by their experiences, and I've seen people who made meaning out of their experiences and were more resilient. So I really think it's like we have an opportunity right now to practice dealing with what's been given to us. I guess we have the ability to develop those skills right now. Will we all? This is sort of our chance to do that, right? And that's why I think this conversation is important, because like what can I do to cope well and build those skills?
Michelle, I think you said such an important word, which is meaning. Like I think when we consciously try to make meaning out of chaos, meaning out of uncertainty or crisis, we grow from that, right? We are able to understand what we value. We're able to find gratitude, which we know gratitude is an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety treatment. So it's all about how do we find that meaning? And people who do, I think, will be more resilient.
Can you talk about what that looks like? Because if you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, I mean, it's so powerful what he says, but I think some of us go, I'm in pain. How do I make meaning of this pain? What is that? Can you exemplify that? What does that really look like?
Is that all of us, or?
Yeah, it is. It's
Yeah.
any and all.
And I'm a giant believer in perspective. It's a big part of what I do in practice. And I think the way we look at things is really important. So Michelle, you also use the word opportunity along with meaning. I do think this is an opportunity. I think it's a chance for us to try and create tools and try and create a path that can be a good path from what we've all experienced, not just in the last year and a half, but there's been an awful lot of turmoil going back a little bit past then, I believe. And I just think that if we can see it as a chance, as a growth experience, that is where we can create, to use your words, Ron, like maybe the next greatest generation that Look what we were able to take from this. We saw it as an opportunity, not that we're victims, but that it was a chance to do something better. And so to me, that's how you see it, though. It's a perspective, and not feeling beaten down by it, but just a chance to do something better.
And if we look at it from a mindfulness perspective again, that community talks about the difference between pain and suffering. And the difference basically, simplistically, being that the more we are able to, for just this moment, accept or sit with the painful situation and accept or sit with our thoughts and emotions around that painful situation, then we just have the pain. On the other hand, the more we judge either the situation or our reaction to it, then we create a whole layer of suffering on top of the pain. And so basically some choices become pain or pain and suffering. And so that's another way to look at this.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a powerful idea. Laurie?
I think back, I think it was several Yom Kippurs ago where you really challenged the community to not complain for a period of time. And we had bracelets, right, that were reminding us. And I think that's a great example of when we stop. Well, complaining is a way that we're focusing on the negative, okay? And it absorbs us. If we try to not do that and try to think what's to be grateful for, what am I learning, we have a whole different emotional experience. When I think back to how kids were dealing with the pandemic at the beginning, what I saw in my practice is kids were thriving in this chaos. And I thought, what is going on? Well, they're sleeping more, right? Because they're not going to school. They're having more time with their parents. They're less overscheduled. They're just having more quiet time. There were all of these things that get lost in what kids are normally exposed to. And they had less homework. And I thought, wow, we need to pay attention to this. But if we were focusing on all the negative, we never could have seen the other side. So I think that's how we find meaning, is we look for it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're also talking about a kind of leadership that we have to exercise, right? A lot of this is parenting and grandparenting and conversations we have with each other and modeling certain conversations and behaviors. Anybody want to add anything to this?
I was just gonna say, I noticed someone had a question, and do you want people to put their questions in the chat?
Yeah, as about after this, I was going to say, but let me do it now, Michelle. Thank you. Put your questions in the chat bar if you wouldn't mind. Eleanor, I see your hand raised. If you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat bar, and you can ask anything. As I said earlier, you can ask a question of somebody specifically or of the group. So we've talked a lot about the experience of living with uncertainty, and I love that we have an addendum to our title. It just doesn't just say, you know, living in times that are uncertain, but also how to thrive. I think it said something like that. How do we thrive? Let's get to the how-tos, because I think people want a sense of agency. What do I do? And I want to ask you something specific. One of the groups within the community that I deal with a lot and care a lot about are elderly people who wonder, is this the rest of my life? Whereas I can say, okay, if this lasts X amount of time, conceptually, it's okay, I can manage. But what if you're already in your last years of life and you're saying, is this it? How would you address that person?
Well, first of all, I mean, there certainly is legitimacy to that line of thinking. And I think that it's important to not really not poo-poo those kinds of thoughts and say, oh, it'll be fine, or just, you know, just join some Zoom groups and you'll be fine. So I think it's really, it starts with kind of honoring and really listening to and helping someone feel heard. And then I think it's also, again, we've been talking a lot about mindfulness, and that's when we can't change a situation. That's one of the things that I try to bring to my work with people and my thinking about myself is this idea of if we can't change a situation, perhaps we can change our relationship to the situation, change our relationship to the thoughts and the emotions. And again, riding the wave of this uncertainty, knowing that every time we have an emotion, there's some research that shows that emotions last between about 9 and 90 seconds, something like that. And it's a wave where it rises and falls. And so that we do know that thoughts and emotions, although they repeat, each entity is separate and does end. And that one of the things that we can do in order to ride the wave is we can use a skill that we call abdominal breathing. I don't want to take the time to talk about it here, but it's a form of slow, deep breathing that basically triggers a part of our nervous system to create what I call the rest and relax response, so that we're better able to ride these waves. And so the idea is, rather than when we come up with those questions and we have those questions, rather than trying to answer them or get rid of them or prevent them or deny them, it's allowing ourselves to sit with them. One of the mindfulness teachers named Thich Nhat Hanh, he has this wonderful quote that I refer to a lot. He said, if whatever it is, uncertainty, these questions, these thoughts, if that's what's at your door, he says, invite it in for tea. So I think that's approaching these situations with an attitude of kindly curiosity. And I also want to emphasize the importance of self-compassion when we are having these questions, when we are having these thoughts, when we are having these emotions, when we are in the midst of this. Sometimes it's easy, again, to judge ourselves. If we can have self-compassion and put that in the mix as much as we're able to, that soothes the situation, I think, significantly.
Thank you, Lynn.
Mhm.
So we're in the area of self-care. So I think some people, don't know what it means to them. They know what it means to other people around them. They don't know how to do it themselves. You gave, I think, a couple of great examples. What are some other parts of good self-care during a time of uncertainty? And as just to point out, there should be an asterisk as every time we say that, because you've all said we've always lived through uncertainty. All of life, every breath has been uncertain, and yet now it just feels more palpable. So what are some other aspects of good self-care?
Well, I want to say that, earlier we were talking about how when you start thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to be and what will happen, what's not helpful is when we start to treat that like we have to solve it, like we have to figure it out. And we get stuck up in our head or doing the endless Google searching, because we think that we've got to come to resolution. And it's really important to recognize that although your brain gives you an invitation to figure out the answer, it's really okay to decline, right? Oh, there's actually not an answer to that. I'm not going to try to sit here stuck in my head figuring it out. And it's easier said than done, right? Like my husband will tell you, there have been many nights where I'm sitting there going, what about this? And what about this? And he says, what would you say to one of your patients, Michelle? Oh yeah, I don't get to know. Oh, well, I don't know. Anything could happen. I'll deal with it when it comes. But practicing being able to say I actually don't know. And I can practice doing, as Lynn said, kind of sitting with like, I'm going to feel that wave of emotion about the I don't know, but it'll actually resolve much more quickly than if you stay there up in your head trying to figure out the unanswerable.
And just jumping onto what you were saying, Michelle, Michelle and I chatted briefly about this this panel today over the weekend. And one of the things that I had said in our conversation is the importance of trying to, when we're in that storytelling, what Laurie was talking about, the storytelling, the scenario building, that what if, the more that we're able to gently and compassionately catch ourselves and our brain in the what ifs and bring them back into what is. and kind of anchor ourselves in this moment, perhaps by paying attention to what our senses are, what's greeting our senses in the room, even the play of light and shadow on the wall, or the sound of a dog barking outside, or the feel of the my feet on the floor. And we can anchor ourselves in the room and just ask ourselves right here, right now, in just this moment, in just this room, am I okay? Am I safe? Is anything bad happening? And then possibly redirect and do some of that abdominal breathing, and then possibly then redirect our attention to something we do have control over right now, whether it's making a phone call or getting that cup of tea or whatever it might be.
I think, Lynn, you just hit the nail on the head. Like, that has been my mantra for the last year and a half, and that is we need that stability, we need that anchor. And the way I think you find that is through creating literally what you just said, finding that control. So what can I control? I can create a routine. I can make sure that I have a plan, that I'm going to make dinner, or I'm going to make sure that I'm going to go for a drive down by the beach. That's something I know that I can do. I have that ability. It doesn't matter what's going on around me at all. I get to pick that. I get to choose. I get to decide for myself that this is something I'm going to do today. And when we find enough of those things and we can create a routine from those things, it does provide a sense of stability. It doesn't solve, like Michelle was saying, it doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't give us an answer. But what it does do is it takes a different part of our life and we emphasize that, and we try to feel good about that, and we create the routine for that. And that's where we get our base. That's where we get our strength. And I think that sense of control, I don't want to go too far and give Michelle more clients for her OCD group. But outside of that, we want to be able to control what we can.
So you raised, go ahead, Laurie, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think sometimes being very concrete and making a list, what we don't have control over right now and what we do have control. Because I think sometimes trying to think about that just in our heads, what we can't control just becomes so much bigger. But when we actually make a list, I love lists. It really shows us, wow, these are all the things that I could do on a concrete level. Just like making a list of all of the uncertain times that we've gotten through and being able to refer to that. Wow, I've done this before. I'm actually better at it than I think I am. Those lists, cue cards, I have them around my office as little reminders. And to me, that's part of self-care.
Right. We do it constantly. We don't realize how much we sit with uncertainty. It's just right now, our mind is telling us that this we need to know.
Right. So Ron, back to your self-care question. I think we a lot of times think sleep, food, exercise, those are all really good things. But I think there are also interpersonal ways of caring for ourselves, being selective about who we choose to spend time with. Spending time with people who we know bring us joy and embrace us, setting good boundaries, knowing when you need to say no, and being compassionate with yourself about that. To me, that's a big self-care. Making a list, again, back to the list of where do I find comfort? Do I find comfort in eating chocolate? Do I find comfort in baths, going for a walk? Having that list and saying every day I'm going to pick 2 items off of this list that I am going to do. That's going to be a routine.
What I was holding up before, it's probably hard to see, but this is actually, because I struggle with this. It's called 60 Ways to Nurture Myself. But the thing I love about it is it breaks things down into the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. And this is something someone else did, but it's a great example of like, what are the things that make meaning for me, that help me to cope? And they're tiny. I think a lot of us think of self-care as it's like something big, like getting a massage or going away on some vacation. And it's not. It's about these little meaningful things to us. And Laurie, I love how you mentioned just setting boundaries, like just knowing, like, if we have a lot of I should and I have to and I must, and recognizing like, this is about what I can do, and it's okay for me to say no to certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
Right.
I want to ask all of you a question.
Mhm.
How do you, as professionals, distinguish between expected responses to living with uncertainty, meaning what everybody goes through, every human is dealing with this, and somebody who needs a higher level of help?
It's a good question. To me, I think it has to do with degree of suffering and how many areas in one's life is this affecting? How is it affecting their functioning at work, at school, in their relationships, their sleep, and if it's extends broadly across all those areas, and some of the strategies that we're talking about have been tried, and people are still feeling, I'm suffering, I'm in a lot of pain. To me, that's an indication of additional help might be warranted. And that could be from going to see a therapist. It could be online support groups. There are a lot of those now. It could be having an app on your phone that helps you remember to do some mindfulness exercises, a variety of things, but it has to do with degree of pain and suffering, I think.
Right, thank you. Anybody
Love
want
to
to
hear
add?
what everybody else.
Yeah, I would add one thing. Like, I think one thing that's important is to normalize that when you go through a really abnormal experience, right? A pandemic is not a normal state of human existence, right? And hopefully it won't be, right? This too shall pass. But when we experience something that's abnormal and out of our experience, we tend to have these reactions that can be expected, and we have to normalize those experiences, right? Those experiences might be, I'm struggling to sleep, or my appetite is different, or I'm a little more moody, or, with kids, that they're more emotional, or they regress a little bit in some of their skills. And we have to go, that's normal. And we want to be patient and just ease up a little bit and be kind to everybody about that. But it's like when Laurie said, when it interferes with your ability to do the things you want to do, the way that you want to live life, that's when maybe you need a little more support.
And what about somebody who doesn't know if their level of anxiety is normal, quote unquote, or not, because everybody's anxious? What do you suggest?
No, it's what I think that, what everybody's been saying, that how does it impact the other areas of my life? Is it getting in the way of me spending time with friends or family? Is it getting in the way of my job? Is it impacting my sleep? Is it impacting my eating? When those areas start to get changed, that's when it's important to say, okay, this isn't a healthy way for me to handle this, and I might need some help. And whether that means the suggestions that have already been made, or finding something else that works. Being from Chicago, I still love seeing the ocean after 19 years. So I drive down to the ocean. That feels good. You find those things that work for you and you go after them. And if those things aren't helping enough, that's when you go and you get extra help.
Great.
I also think going and even having an initial appointment with a mental health professional, ideally their first job is to help understand what somebody's going through and to put perspective on that. So to sometimes normalize and validate. So when I'm answering your question, Ron, it's like that person could help make that determination for the person if they feel like they can't figure it out themselves. That doesn't mean they're going to be in therapy for the next 6 months. It's just have that chat with somebody and let somebody else give feedback around that.
Is there anything that any of you think we haven't covered that's vital to this conversation?
One of the suggestions I would add that I didn't say at any point, I would encourage everybody to break their crystal balls. We all feel like we know what's happening and what's going to come. And unless somebody's got some special talent that I don't know about, I think it's really important that we stop trying to predict what's coming. And it kind of goes back to a lot of things that have been said. So rather than assuming these things, get rid of your crystal ball and do all of these other things that we've been talking about, because we don't know, we can't predict it. I don't think that We're the wizard from Kansas. I don't think we can quite take that step. So please be careful with that.
Great, thank you. Lynn?
And just a couple of things, we can also find a lot of good resources online, whether they be mindfulness resources. I was looking the other day in preparation for this at the AARP website, which is a really good website, and they have a mental health resource center there. There are also opportunities to do virtual volunteering, so that can help us add meaning to our life and feel like we are doing something productive. And then I just found a quote from the Dalai Lama that I thought was kind of interesting. He says, "If you have fear of some pain or suffering, you should examine whether there's anything you can do about it. If you can, there's no need to worry about it. If you cannot do anything, then there's also no need to worry."
Right.
Yeah.
Love that. I also just want to make a sort of state the importance of sometimes just getting out of our own space and helping others. That can be a huge intervention, right? We know also that too is an antidepressant, anti-anxiety. Sometimes we just need to move away from our own stuff and do things that make an impact and that help other people. And really, I think a helpful strategy.
Yeah, I always think that's the antidepressant I'm allowed to prescribe.
Right.
Service, volunteerism, and there's so much evidence that it works and changes people's lives. I'm aware of the time and your time constraints. Let's dedicate the next 10 to 15 minutes to questions. So if anybody wants to add questions, please add them. What I want to do is refer to the questions that we have. Some of them are statements, but there are questions in them. So specific to you, Michelle, but then he opens it to all of us. He writes, "How do I convince my son not to withdraw and give up? He knows the future is very bleak and sees no point in going on. He's 24, graduated from UCLA in psychology 2 years ago, summa cum laude, top of the class, extremely intelligent, far too oversensitive." How do you respond to this man's plea, essentially? He's saying here, if I can save my son's life, my life will not have been in vain. So there's clearly some pain and urgency here. And
So
Michelle, he addressed you first, but then he opened it to all of us. So let's.
Right, exactly. And I do think we probably all have something to say. And I'm kind of curious if he's in therapy right now. That's one question that I have. And so if you want to answer that, if he's not and he's willing to, it might be a good thing. But what I want to say is, first of all, I really feel you on this. We love our kids. I think for so many of us, we love our kids more than we love life itself. And when they suffer, we suffer. And when we see a kid that we love, a young adult that we love, doing what looks like giving up on life, it strikes terror in us. And we feel like the first thing we need to do is save their life. So I totally feel you on that. So number one, I'm going to say, if he's not in therapy, I'd encourage him to get help. I also want to encourage you to reach out to, there are a couple places. One is like the suicide hotline. It's not just for people who are suicidal. It's also for us. I've called them myself, about people I love. And there are also warm lines out there. So I want you to know those are resources for us as parents. And then, something that's important to know is when someone that we love seems to be giving up, a lot of times, and I'm not sure if this is what's happening, but they'll talk a lot about how bleak the future seems. And our tendency is to jump in and start saying, no, that's not the case. No, you look at how bright it is. And we try to shine the light. And when we do that in our own desire to help, what it is, it's like shining a light on someone who's been sitting in a dark room, and it kind of blinds them and they're not ready to see it. And so the most amazing thing that we can do is to listen and hear him share everything about how bleak that he thinks it is, to let him put it all out there. I hear you, and not to even jump in with any kinds of recommendation or convincing him to do anything, but really to hear him, let him say it all. And sometimes that's the best, most important thing we can do.
Yeah, powerful. Thank you. Do any of you want to add to that?
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Very well stated.
Let me go to another comment, and there's clearly a plea in this as well, a plea for advice and help. And I hope that some of what we've talked about for most of the hour has answered your questions. But here's what you state. You say, my background level of anxiety is so high now that the smallest thing can put me over the edge. I think a lot of people feel that. I question everything I might do or not do. The doctors have different opinions as to whether I'm immunocompromised or not, and to what degree. I need tools to handle this. So some of this, your responses will reiterate what you said in the last hour, but how would you summarize a response?
Yeah, I would just look at the parts that you know that you still can control, because there are things every single day that we can control, whether it's being able to go for a walk or just literally changing the room that you're sitting in your house or sitting in a backyard, so that there's something different about your day that you can control. You determine it, you decide it. So you're not waiting for a doctor to tell you something. It's something that you can, someone said earlier about something concrete that you can grab onto and hold yourself. Like, that is so important through this, is every one of us every day can find things like that we can do. And, not to belabor the point, but reach out to people around you, people that you care about, people that you know, and seek the support. You don't have to do this by yourself.
Lynn?
So I was in one of the mindfulness apps, which is called 10% Happier. Not that I'm promoting that, or I'm just saying this is where I found it. They had a course on dealing with anxiety, and one of the methods that they were talking about, which I really liked, is the idea of visualizing your anxiety. And you can either visualize it as, the caveman brain sitting in your head who, I don't know whether any of you are old enough to remember the really bad sitcom. Was it even a sitcom called Lost in Space? When I was a kid, where, that stupid robot would go, danger, Will Robinson, danger. And we've got that guy in our brain, that caveman brain, and the idea of responding to the caveman brain and saying, look, I understand you're doing what you believe you're supposed to do, and I really appreciate that. But, you're kind of obsolete, and you're kind of coming up with, you're very good at creative, scary storytelling. But, I'm gonna, I know you're there, and I'm gonna take you with me and do what I want to do anyway. Or we can see our anxiety as kind of a cute dinosaur, like a Dino in the Flintstones, or, Barney or something like that, that we can, in the 10% Happier, they had this cartoon image of you driving your motorcycle with your dinosaur sitting in your sidecar. And, so that might be something that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, you helped me already. Except Barney disturbed me a little bit. I liked everything else you said. Laurie, did you want to add?
No, I was just going to follow what Lynn was saying about this is where, when we're feeling so raw and everything can kind of send us into that anxiety-ridden place, that's where I think the mindfulness exercises really help. And there's things called grounding exercises where really in the moment, oftentimes focusing on what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, can really take us away from that edge point. When I'm feeling anxious, I go do dishes in the sink, but I do dishes with lots of bubbles and warm water. And it's so, yeah, the dishes are getting done, but really what I'm focusing on is that sensory experience of the water and the bubbles. And it just kind of relaxes me and takes me away, even momentarily, but it gives me the sense that I then have control over this awful feeling internally, which then motivates us to want to do other things like that.
Is that a Calgon moment, Laurie?
It is a Calgon moment, but it really, really works. Just, focusing on those sensory experiences.
And it ties in with Michelle, with what you said earlier, which is the solutions aren't always, time at the Four Seasons or a massage. Sometimes it's literally something in your home, an experience that you can cultivate. So what I take from this deep, rich conversation is, first of all, that this is an us experience. There's nobody who's outside this. And I think we've heard it, but we also, I think forget that. We think I'm alone in this and I'm unique in what I'm feeling. And I get the sense from all of you that some people may be unique in terms of the degree that they're feeling this, or maybe what they're unique in is not having some of the tools that you've offered today. Maybe that universalizes self-care as well. I also got a good sense that it's not our circumstances that we can control. We're not going to change what's on the news, but we're going to change how we respond to it. And then each of you gave great, valuable ways of coping. And I'm really grateful to all of you. It's been really informative, really interesting. Lynn, a real pleasure to meet you, albeit via Zoom, but thank you to all of you. I'm grateful for you. Michelle and Laurie for helping put this together, Jason for joining us, and all your insights. To all of you, thank you very, very much. This has been a real gift. As a rabbi, Jason kind of set me up. He talked about our sponsors. Yeah.
Oh, Ron, it's Mark. Yeah, I couldn't get my in the chat box. I kind of screwed that up, but I just wanted to mention to all of you, I have a son who's autistic, and he's 41 years old. And when he was 10 or 11 years old, we had a horrible time with him. He would run away, and we tried to put him on some medications, and then they didn't work. Now he's 41 years old, and we have him on the correct medications. He lives with supported staff. He still has issues, and we're dealing with him. For the most part, he's pretty good, but every so often he goes off, and I have staff with him. Sometimes he runs away. And one time I did get a call in the evening that he was at the AM/PM, and a policeman picked him up. This is at 3 o'clock in the morning. And boy, did I have anxiety. So I just wanted to mention that to you.
Mark, thank you.
But he's doing well now. He's doing fairly well.
Good. Thank God, and thanks to good people. So I want to just close by thanking all of you. As Jason said, Yom Kippur is hours away. It's on my mind just a little. But one of the things that's on my mind is there's a couple things. One is two texts in the tradition. One is that we say, hey, let's create a court down here that mirrors what we imagine a heavenly court looks like. And the first thing we say is, let all of us pray among the sinners, among the broken people. And yet we know the reality has always been nobody's outside that circle. We're all broken. That's the beauty of us. And it's just so, I think we can drop our shoulders when we go, these people here are just like me. We're all strugglers. And I think what you helped us with is the struggle, how to do it more effectively and wisely and carefully, with care for one another and ourselves. And the other thing that I love in the text that I'll talk about a little probably tomorrow evening is that I did last week, actually, I'm forgetting past and future sermons. It's the idea of being forgiven before you apologize. You have this idea that God says, the Hebrew text says, I have forgiven you on the basis of your words and your actions. In other words, I see who you are. I see that you're struggling and trying. So imagine if we can look ourselves in the mirror before Yom Kippur while we're getting ready and dressed and say, I forgive you. Now go to the synagogue and apologize, but I forgive you. I think that's what we deserve. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure. And I will post this so people can share it, any of you, and re-listen to it. Thanks to everybody very much.
Thanks, Ron.
Of course.